Okay, this video is going to talk very quickly about a box and whisker plot and what it is and how we use them. So box and whisker plots are used for two things. You can either determine ranges or you can determine percents of data. So we can look at percentages, and the only percentages we can talk about in quarters. So we can talk about something as 25% of the data, 50% of the data, 75% of the data, or there is 100% of my data. So ranges are literally, you take one number and subtract the other one. So you talk about what's the highest number you want to go up to, and you subtract the lowest number you want to go down from, so you can find a range. So what I have here is a very quick example of how I would interpret and all the things that I can do to interpret a box and whisker plot. So first of all, let's just talk about percentages. So percentages, we have 25%, 50%, 75, and 100%. So how are box and whisker plots created? Well, they're created off of ranges of data. So essentially what I have here is I have data ranging from, if you read the graph, we go off the number line, it's a 65, and we go to all the way to 115. So I have data ranging from 65 to 115. Well, if I want to know the actual range of all of my numbers, okay, I can go from 115 to 65. I would subtract them, and you'll find that I have 50. Okay, so 115 minus 65 is 50. So my scores ranged a amount of 50 points. Now, that's with all of the data. Now, there are smaller ranges that I could find. Like if I wanted to, I could say, hey, what's the range of just this particular whisker? So one of the things you want to start to think about when you do box and whisker plots is there is 5 numbers you always want to put directly onto your box and whisker plot right away. You want to put the low, you want to put the high, you want to put the middle, so in this case, 95. You then also want to put the box, the beginning of the box, which is 80. And then you want to put the end of the box, which in this case is 105. So these are the 5 numbers you always want to find. The low, the beginning of the box, the line in the box, which represents the median, and we'll talk about that in a second, the end of the box, and the 115, which is the high. So with a box and whisker plot, what it's actually doing is physically showing you ranges. That's all it is. It's literally showing you that when I take my data and I cut it in half of the kids in my class got a 95 or greater, and half of the kids in my class got a 95 or lower. So 95 is the middle marking grade. Below that is 50% of my class. Above that is 50% of my class. And that's it. So what you can see here is that if my test is out of 120 points, well, there's only 30 points from 90 to 120. So there's really only 25 points from 95 to 120. Well, no one in my class got 120. Okay, so obviously you can see that 50% of my class at least got a 95, but this range is very short simply because of the way the data is collected and created. So don't worry about the in particular size of one whisker. The one side of the box is bigger than the other side of the box. What you need to remember is that this line right here is always the 50% mark. Okay? The beginning of the box, okay, is the 25% mark. The end of the box is the 75% mark. All right? So this is how we can talk about our things in quarters. Because from 25 to 50, well, this box in itself is 25. 50 to 75, this box in of itself is 25%. So therefore, if that's 50, that's 25, that makes that 25%, and it makes this 25%. So all we can do is talk about percentages, or we can talk about ranges, and that's it. So the things you need to remember is that each whisker is 25%, each side of the box is 25%, and this line in the middle is 50%. Because the only other things I could ask you are questions like this. Did at least half of my class score a 90? Well, that's an easy answer. The answer is no, simply because 90 is not one of the significant 5 values. For me to say 50% of my class, I must include the number 95. If I don't include the number 95, it must go with 50, okay? Now, if I could also say, did at least a quarter of my class, 25%, score above a 105? The answer to that is yes. Well, if that's 75%, that's 25. Well, 105 is the 75%, so 25% scored 105 or above. So all I can use box and whisker plot really is for percentages, or I can talk about ranges as well. So ranges, I can take one value, so I can say, hey, what is the range from the end of the box to the highest value? I can say the interquartile range, so the inner quarters, so the quarters that are in the middle, okay, so the quarter here, these are the two quarters that are in the middle. If you think about the idea of median in general, I have two quarters, so that's the middle. I can say 105 to 80 is a difference of 25. I can ask what's the difference between the median and the first quarter, which is 15. What's the median and the third quarter? So that's 10. And I can always say, okay, what's the third quarter? What's the range between the third quarter and the high value? So the extreme is 10 points as well. I can ask you what's the median between the lowest, or what's the range between the lowest and the first quarter, which is Q1, and that happens to be 15 points. So notice when I talk about ranges, I'm going to have to tell you specifically where I want you to take the high number, what two numbers I want for ranges. Percentages, if you're going to talk about percentages, or you're going to answer yes to a question about percentages, okay, the percentage has to start from one of the given 5 numbers. These are the magical 5 numbers that you need to be able to talk about percentages. If one of these 5 numbers, okay, which is why I'm telling you have to find them first, if one of these 5 numbers isn't on there and I ask you a question about any other number, so if I say 70, is 25% of my class score a 70? Answer, no. Why not? Well, because I can only talk about 80 and 25%. I can only talk about 95 and 50%. I can only talk about 105 as being 75% below or 25% above, okay? So that's why you need to find these 5 values. And that's all you can do with box and whisker plots, and there's nothing more else to do with them. So I hope that helps.